All right, everybody. Good morning. I told myself if Hugh Hewitt didn't stop talking about sports by the time I was done with that Amud of Gemara, I'll make another video. So here we are. So as I promised yesterday, I was going to make a video. Do angels have free will? And the answer is we don't really have a very clear answer on this question. Because, like we said yesterday, it's very difficult to define what the word free will means. Meaning, not everything that we would consider to be the issues of free will are really free will. The main issue that we have in what we would describe as free will, as we said yesterday, is how do we recognize the divine? And that's pretty much the choice that we have. Do we recognize the divine or do we not recognize the divine? Do we accept just this mask that we have that we call the world and think that's all there is, or do we recognize there's something behind the mask? That's really all free will is. Nothing else is up to us. Like I said, it's everything else is pretty much predetermined. And according to Ishbitzer, even our actions, meaning even our actions that would represent our piety, how religious we are, how or not, has somehow a level of predetermination, which again, it's difficult to understand. But when you see the arguments against free will, it becomes kind of easy to understand. Right? So these whole questions, is free will an illusion and so forth. Essentially, though, it's generally said that our free will is what separates us from both the animals and the angels. That's a generally accepted teaching in Judaism. However, it is not a fundamental, it is not a dogma, and also there is plenty of literature which would point to the idea that in fact it's the opposite. Again, the question is, how do we define these terms of free will? But if it's within this concept of how we act in the world, it would appear that angels do have a certain degree of free will, whatever that means. My wife, she should be well, often says one of the great problems in the world is that we anthropomorphize animals. And she's correct about that. Because there's something special about the human being that separates us from what we would call the other animals. If we would even say the other animals, generally we just say what separates us from the animals. But similarly, it is a mistake for us to anthropomorphize other beings that are not human. Particularly ones that are not from this plane of earth. Beings that our friend Rabbi Bart Tzadok, I'm quoting him because he's the one who says this all the time, but he's right. These beings would be called extraterrestrial. Doesn't necessarily mean that they have a body and live on another planet, although they might. Some of them might. Some of them almost certainly do, according to different interpretations. But these beings that even if they are beings that live on the plane that we would call inner Earth, would also essentially be extraterrestrial because they're not inhabitants of terra firma, and also this concept of inner Earth may very well be a concept that is another dimension as opposed to another piece of real estate that we can measure with our current technology that at least is publicly known. So these extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional beings, it's really the same thing, it's just extra-dimensional is a type of extraterrestrial. Whether we call them angels, we call them demons, we call them jinn, we might call it, other religions might call them deities, gods, which actually, according to both the Rambam and the Zohar Kodesh, one of the categories, the species or races of angels that exist are called Elohim. And then there's another species called the B'nai Elohim. So they're gods and the sons of gods. And these are species of angels, again. So what exactly are we talking about here? We're not talking about the Almighty. And this is really the crux of the issue that we want to talk about. Those who accuse Judaism of henotheism, or what some might call monolatry, it's really not true, because I'll give you this example again. I know there was some curiosity with the comparison to Eastern religions. It's well known that the ancient text of Hinduism expresses a monotheistic ideology. However, we know Hinduism in its various forms presents itself as polytheistic. So which is it? So one of the great scholars of world religion, particularly of the Eastern religions, was Alan Watts. And Alan Watts, coming from a Christian background, said that people from a Judeo-Christian worldview should not call the Hindu gods gods, but rather should call them angels. Because the concept of Brahman, not Brahma, Brahmin, in Hinduism is theologically similar to the idea of the Almighty, of the Creator, how it's generally understood in the monotheistic West, particularly in light of the influence of Aristotle, of Aristotelian philosophy, the idea of the unmoved mover, of something that's ineffable, something that's invisible, cannot even become represented fairly, visibly, other than by a name. The unmoved mover, the first cause, the Motzei Rishon, as the Rambam would say. And that is what the Hindus would call Brahman. Again, it's a different tradition, but it's interesting how that could be a cognate of Abraham, some claim. And these other beings that are, these avatars of these Hindu gods, that's a Hindu word, avatar, that are well known with all the different pictures that they're represented with. These beings, according to Dr. Watts, should be called angels in the Western parlance and not gods. The problem is the Hindus worship these beings, and that is Avodah Zarah. We're not allowed to worship angels. We can address them, we can talk to them, we can sing hymns about them and even to them, but we cannot worship them. We could even perhaps venerate them, but not worship them. There's this fine line between veneration and worship, which would be a reason maybe not to venerate, because we don't have to venerate them. There's no need to venerate them. The question is it permitted to do so? It's certainly thin ice as far as the angels, how we understand them. But certainly, the angels, as we understand them, have personalities, and they are intelligent beings. Let's get away from the Hindu tradition. Let's get into the Jewish tradition. And furthermore, those who say that angels are merely automatons, they're like robots, they're just programmed to do a mission and that's it. We know that we human beings have invented such a thing as artificial intelligence that appears to be like us and is getting more and more so. And so the angels are at the very least a form of natural intelligence that could be compared in a way to artificial intelligence, and so therefore they have personalities. They are archetypes that are distinct from one another. There's a difference between Michael and Gabriel. Just like in the spheres, there's Chesed and Gvura, and that's Michael and Gabriel. So the biggest proof, I would say, that the angels have free will of some form. Again, maybe not to, first of all, it's generally been stated by a lot of Jewish thinkers that angels do materially have the same capacity for free will that human beings have. It's just that they are so much in the presence of God that they would be foolish to choose evil, meaning that their free will has been taken away from them by virtue of their revelation of the truth of God, like we said yesterday about, in a sense, an Orthodox Jew doesn't have a choice to go eat at McDonald's. He has a choice to do so, but it's not on his radar. And so essentially for the angels, to choose evil is not on their radar. They don't have the Yetzer Hara in the sense that we human beings have. However, the Sfarim HaKadoshim, the Chesed Lavram, and others explain that the angels are fighting with one another, like bucking rams. Now, rams apparently are beings that live with, they're animals, they have their instinct, they don't have free will, but it's not really fair to compare an angel to an animal in that sense, how many people like to say that angels are like animals because they don't have free will. They're very different because they're on a higher evolutionary level. They are, some of the angels are probably our kin, but that's a story for a different time. Pre-Adamic kin. But putting that kinship issue aside, on the kinfolk, right? Putting all that aside, we find ourselves with this issue here, that the angels, in the book of Daniel, we know that Gabriel and Michael, they were trying to come bring a message to Daniel. It was a whole story, and Michael said he was, or it was Gabriel said, I don't remember the pasuk exactly, he was held back by the prince of the kingdom of Persia, meaning an angel that represents Persia in the heavenly UN, the Heavenly League of Nations, that this angel was preventing Michael from bringing his message to Daniel, Gabriel from bringing the message to Daniel. So it's like a type of free will, even if it's not really free will. So that's what we're talking about here. That and it's doing something that's in opposition. And similarly, there's a story that there's this in the Book of Kings, a spirit of folly that was put into the mouth of the false prophets. So there are a lot of things that would point to angels doing things outside of the realm of just goodness, right? So that's the main thing that I want to bring out here. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment.